Hello, and welcome to Book of the Mouse Club, episode 46, Tuesday, September 15th, 2020.
Morning, monsieur.
Where are you off to?
The bookshop. I just finished the most wonderful story about a beanstalk and an ogre and
That's nice. Marie! The baguettes! Hurry up!
I'm sorry, but how can one possibly pay attention to a book with no pictures in it?
My dear child, there are a great many good books in this world without pictures.
I almost bounced clear out of the book. Some bouncing, huh?
Come home or make myself known.
J. Thaddeus Turtle, Esquire. Have you never met him? You will find his story in this delightful little book, The Wind and the Willows.
I've come to return the book I borrowed.
Finished already?
Oh, I couldn't put it down. Have you got anything new?
Welcome back. I'm your host, Courtney, and I'm joined, as always, by my lovely co-host, Emily.
Hey, Courtney, it's great to be back.
Yeah, and today we have the distinction of welcoming a guest for the third time, which is a first for our show. Last year, we interviewed Jim about his writing process and wide range of books about Disney in episode 30, and he joined us once again on episode 35 to discuss rare books you should seek for your own Disney collection. So tonight, we're so excited to hear his historic knowledge of books that inspired Walt Disney. Welcome back, Jim Korkis.
Well, thank you, ladies, so much. It's always a pleasure to join this podcast and to share so much information with listeners who I know are really interested in books, because we're certainly living in an age now where not everyone is interested in books. I will say that both of my brothers have very, very, very little interest in any books of any kind, including my own. I don't even know if they've ever even read one of my books, but so it's nice to talk with people who love books and understand books and realize that the tactile experience you can get from a book and the new information and the new perspective is something that is very unique, and that no matter what happens in the world today, I think books will always survive and be important, even in the future, even in this alternate universe that we're in. So thank you both so much for inviting me back, and I hope I'll be able to provide some interesting information or some surprises.
And Jim, we're so excited to have you back on the show. And like we said, last time we talked to you was our 35th episode, and that was back in March. It feels so long ago and yet so recent. And a lot has happened since March in the last 6 months.
I'm wondering what happened in March. Was there anything important that happened in March?
Some major world events have gone down since then. So could you just catch us and our listeners up? What have you been up to since March?
I have been doing exactly the same as your listeners. I've been feeling trapped inside with cabin fever. I have been snacking too much on junk food. I have been worrying about paying bills. I've been discovering all sorts of things on TV, like dozens of documentaries on Bigfoot. So I know more about Bigfoot now than I ever knew in my entire life. They're all on the Travel Channel and the History Channel and all of that. And of course, I have done my best to try and maintain my writing schedule, where I try to write for several hours every day, even on the weekends and even on holidays. And before the end of the year, I have 3 books that'll be coming out. By the end of this month, we'll have The Vault of Walt, Volume 9, the Halloween edition, which is just stories about Disney and Halloween. And that was the challenge that was given to me by the publisher, is could I write a Halloween edition but not just go and write about Disney villains or about spooky films that Disney did, things that are specific to Halloween. And so I was able to do that. It took me over 2 years to get that done. There's also a book on the storytelling and the creation of the Disney Cruise Line that was ready to go in March, but it will definitely come out in October or November. And then the final book this year will be Secret Stories of Extinct Walt Disney World, which is a companion to the Secret Stories of Extinct Disneyland, which are dozens of 2-page chapters about attractions and shows and restaurants and things like that just no longer exist at Walt Disney World. However, when I started writing that book, I never realized that it was Walt Disney World itself that would become extinct for a period of time. And then those are all written. Those are all ready to go. And so I'm working on another book, and it is a book that only Courtney knows. I hate to share what books are coming, because then people go, have you finished that book? When is that book coming out? Whatever. But I shot that idea by Courtney. Courtney said, yes, I'd buy that book. And that was enough for me. And so I am working on that for spring of next year.
Well, I can't wait for all of them, your top secret book included. But before we talk about Walt's library, we'd love to know a book that has inspired you, perhaps especially as you've been doing all of this writing over the past few months.
Well, I really don't know what to say. Fortunately for me, my library is pretty diverse, and I have been used to doing a lot of Disney reading and Disney-related reading, because again, that works with helps support the books that I'm researching and writing and working on. But one of the things that the pandemic has given me the opportunity to is read some of the books in other areas that I've had, just for fun. I'm interested in so many. I mentioned Bigfoot. I'm thinking of getting some Bigfoot books, but I've always been interested in comics, both comic strips and comic books, and so I have a large collection of not only reference books but compilations of comic strips and comic books, and I've been reading that. I've been reading a lot of humor books, and I find that in some ways that's been very refreshing. It's sort of just like you're supposed to cleanse your palate, before you go to the different pieces of your meal. Reading and looking at some of these other books have helped to clean my palate, so I can go back with a different perspective. Have you ladies read anything especially interesting during the pandemic here?
I've been doing a lot of reading. I have read 53 books thus far this year. I keep track of them on a website. I just finished a book this morning called Monster She Wrote, and it's about it's a collection of different authors who have been inspired within the horror, the speculative fiction, science fiction, tales of the weird. So, of course, I read a book, but now my to-be-read pile grows because I want to read all of the books that were mentioned in that book. What about you, Emily?
I am not quite the avid reader as Courtney. I have recently hit my 26-book goal for the year, which the quarantine orders have helped me do that. Although I think most of the books that I've read were for our podcast because we moved through a lot of books in spring when we all ended up inside a little bit longer. But I also have found that through this quarantine time that I returned to a lot of my personal favorites. I found them very comforting and reassuring, trying to adjust to this new way of living. So I've done a lot of reading, but I've also done a lot of rereading, which can be fun sometimes too.
What was one of and again that's one of the things that we forget to do is to go back and reread the books. I think an awful lot of times people think, well, I've read the book, I don't need to go back and do that again, you know. But I think a lot can be gained by going back and rereading a favorite, or because now you're seeing it through a different perspective. Now that you know the story and you know the characters, you can start to concentrate on some of the other things that you may have missed as you were going through that. So, Emily, did you have a favorite that you, an old favorite that you pulled out to reread?
So one of my old favorites is actually one of Courtney's favorites is Great Gatsby. I know Courtney also recently read that in a different format. You read that, Courtney, as a graphic novel?
I did. That just came out. That was really a cool way to revisit.
So I revisited that one, and one of my favorite fiction is Water for Elephants. I've probably read it 4 or 5 times now, and I revisited that one while I was at the beach.
I think those are great choices, and to me, Great Gatsby, there's a lot of different ways you can read that book in terms of perspective, of what is happening and why it's happening and who these people are, and you know, you may think the first time you read the book, this guy is the good guy, and when you read it again, you go, he's not that good.
There are lots of perspectives.
And again, it's wonderful too, because there have been so many film adaptations of The Great Gatsby, and it's also interesting to take a look at how is that book being adapted into a film. And for those who are listening and going, when are these people going to be talking about Disney? One of the books that I read during the quarantine was The Scarecrow of Romney Marsh. I read the 1960 edition that inspired the TV show episodes, and of course were edited into a theatrical film. I had never, read the book. I had read summaries. I thought I knew, what the book was and all of that. And so I was writing an article about the making of the film, and I thought, it's about time I should read this book, because this is the book that Walt read and decided this would make, a good story. And I was quite surprised. I knew that there were going to be changes because, if you have a 300-page book and you're only going to tell it in, an hour and a half or whatever, a lot of things have to fall by the wayside. But it was interesting to see some of the choices that Walt made. So, for instance, in the book, the Scarecrow actually has a girlfriend. And in fact, she sometimes dresses up as the Scarecrow, to, distract, the forces that would get to him. And she literally sacrifices her life for him. But by the time Walt Disney got it, he goes, I think that's going to be a distracting element in the story, in terms of the story that I want to tell. And so she was transformed into a small romantic character for another character in the film. And so it's always sort of surprising. I remember the first time I read Jurassic Park, I thought, holy cow! You know, I couldn't put it down. I'd come to the end of the chapter, and I said, well, I'll just go over another page, and I'd go on for another chapter or two. And Howard, you know, but the movie was so different. It was still good. I still love the movie, but quite different than the book. Not only the particular scenes, but the whole thrust of the story. And so you never know. There's treasures out there everywhere, and you never know what those are going to be.
And, you know, Courtney and I have had a lot of those same reactions when we've read classic literature. We just compared over the summer Treasure Island and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Pollyanna to the Disney films. And we always have the same reactions, even fairy tales. When you hear the real fairy tale from Grimm's Fairy Tales or Hans Christian Andersen, you're like, wow, that was so different. And Walt did the same thing. He put his own storytelling expertise on it. So I think we've all been there. And that's because Walt is also a reader. And he also has great ideas in storytelling. And you've done a lot of research into this. In your book, Call Me Walt, you have a whole chapter about Walt's reading and being a bibliophile. So
I've got even more information just for this podcast that does not exist in the book.
Oh, fantastic. Because you've told us you've done your research, and now we have more research. You've talked to Diane Disney about Walt as a reader. So what can you share with us about Walt?
And she said, you know, he was constantly reading. He'd be carrying a book around, with him. I've never gotten to that point where I carry around a book with that I'm reading. You know, I want to be in a location, you know, my comfy chair at home and read the book, you know, and no distractions. But I have taken books with me because, again, I'm a single guy. So when I go out to eat, there's no one to talk to. So sometimes I'll take a book. Sometimes I'll take a magazine so that I'll have something to read. And as a result, I end up eating more than I should because I'm so caught up in the reading. But Walt would carry a book around with him, and Walt also inspired his daughters, in particular Diane, you know, to read. And we talk about diversity. Walt had a home library, and of course he had the library in his office, and then he also had the library at the Disney studio that he personally created. In 1935, and I'm sure Didier Getz talked a little bit about this too. Walt took a trip, with Roy and their wives, through England, France, Switzerland, Italy, Holland, and that trip, of course, inspired the Riviera Resort at Walt Disney World. But I don't think people realize that on that trip, Walt actually bought 700 books.
Whoa.
To start the Disney Studio Library. And in fact, that's one of the reasons that if you've been to the Riviera Resort, you'll notice that there's a massive Voyager's Lounge library.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's perfect. I really liked that lounge already.
And that is the reason for that. Now, and we'll go one step more. Remember, this is 1935. If you take a look at the books that are on the shelves, they're from the 1930s. And we'll take this one step more, and these are the surprises you get when you listen to the Book of the Mouse podcast. Many of the Disney books are foreign editions. Ooh.
I love fun facts. Thank you.
And so, now up until about 1935, the Disney Studio Library had sort of a scattered resource library of maybe about 200 books, and on various different subjects, various different topics, things like that. And if you were working there at the Disney studio and you wanted to access the library, you had to hunt down one of the secretaries if she wasn't too busy, and she had to track down the key to open up the case so you could get the book. And starting in 1935, as I said, when Walt brought back hundreds and hundreds of books, because one of the purposes is a lot of these were children's books with illustrations and insects like little bees and things like that. And Walt felt that some of this artwork and some of these stories might be able to inspired some of the short cartoons. And in 1935, Walt put Helen Hennessy in charge of the books. And so she is the one who actually cataloged all of the books using the Dewey Decimal System, which is an awful lot of work. Even with my small library, trying to keep things in order and cataloged and all of that. And she also developed a magazine clipping file, and they also had a massive, complete collection of National Geographic magazine and Sears and Roebuck's catalogs. And I thought, that's kind of odd. Well, National Geographic, maybe, I could. And Jack Hanna, who directed to the Donald Duck films, and for a long time was a part of a story team with Carl Barks, who later went on to do all of the Donald Ducks, all the good Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge stories, for the comic books. They were a story team, and sometimes they'd be stuck for a story. And so Jack told me they'd go down to the library and they'd pull out a Sears and Roebuck catalog, and they'd just start flipping through the pages. And he said if we saw a picture of a tractor, then that would give us some ideas about, the duck on the farm. And he says one time I saw a picture of a steam shovel, and that stuck in my mind, and I later used it as a story with Chip and Dale. And, even Walt himself said, we use the National Geographic magazine, for research on everything. We couldn't be in business without it. And one of the exciting things is that when they set up the studio library, they set it up just like your local public library. So if you were checking out a book, you signed your name on this little card that was on a sleeve, in the front of the book. So you can go back and you can check which animators and which Imagineers had checked out particular books.
That's such a cool lineage of history and all of those resources for them.
And again, two of the significant books, and of course, these are books that those people who have been listening patiently now, you want to sit down, with your pencil and paper, and you're going to scribble down these titles. There's two titles that you might want to think about adding to your own personal collection, and these are books that Walt looked through, but they were in the studio library, and they were constantly checked out by Imagineers. Now, it's important. I'm telling you this right now. It's important to get the name right and the author right, because there's an awful lot of books by the same name that have been created over the time. Now, one of the books that I think some of you may want, and again, when you're looking for these books, be really careful. Take your time. You look on eBay, you look on Abe Books, you look on Amazon, whatever, because the prices can range from $20 to $920. And so while these are nice books to have in your library, you might want to spend that money on the new Jeff Curdy book that came out today on Disney monorails, or on these other Disney books that will be coming out, by the end of the year. But one of the books you may want to get is Voices on the Wind, Polynesian Myths and Chants by Catherine Luomala. This was a book that was written in 1955. She was a missionary who lived with the islanders for a while to learn their customs and their history, and she wrote down all the myths and legends. And the finished book she used as the textbook for her Polynesian folklore class. And the title, Voices on the Wind, and if you put Voices on the Wind, you're going to get another dozen titles that don't deal with Polynesia. And if you put Voices in the Wind, you'll get even more. But the title is a reference to the belief that a person longing to communicate with a loved one who is far away imagines that the wind blowing from that direction is bringing messages, is bringing their voice, and sometimes even bringing the voices from past generations. Now, why you may want that book is Imagineer Rolly Crump used that as his primary reference for the tiki gods in the pre-show garden of Disneyland's The Enchanted Tiki Room. And I talked with Rolly, and he told me that that book was just a Bible for him because it was just so full of information. And so he was able to pull out stories. He was able to pull out, these are the gods and things that they're doing. And I also got a chance to interview Brandon Kayla, and he's the guy who designed both the Trader Sam bars at Disneyland and Walt Disney World, and he said he used the exact same book for inspiration. He has a personal copy in his own library. Now, remember, we're talking about books that influenced. So don't take a look and go, oh my gosh, they copied exactly this from that. That's not the case. When you look through the book, you may see the god Maui and all of that, and you could see how Rolly then took that image and, with his own artistic sensibility, translated that. And you can also see how he took this long, involved story and then summarized it, in a sentence or two for the little signs in the garden. So it's kind of interesting to see, okay, what was somebody thinking and what gave them that idea, and will it give me the same idea? Will that give me a similar idea? And so oftentimes these books that we talk about influencing, it's sort of a dotted line connection rather than a straight line. Although another book that was checked out all the time from the Disney Studio Library, there's more of a direct line. The name of that book is Decorative Art of Victoria's Era by Frances Lichten. This was a book that was published in 1950. It's actually a catalog. It's a hardcover, but it's also available in paperback, again, which you should look at when you're thinking, gee, do I want to add this to my collection? The hardcover has a dust jacket there. It's actually a catalog of decorative art and architecture from that time period. So it's buildings, but it's also statuary. It's also other things. And, of course, some of you who are listening to this podcast know that is the book that includes an image of the Shipley Lydecker House in Baltimore, Maryland, that was built in 1803. Ken Anderson checked out that book, and he copied that exterior, copied that same perspective, and that became the exterior of Disneyland's Haunted Mansion.
I remember learning about that in, Jason Sorrell's Haunted Mansion book, and that jumped out to me because I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, and I wanted to find the house, but unfortunately it has since been torn down. I was so devastated after doing my own research.
And again, timing is everything. And again, but sometimes you go, oh, okay, that's fine. Now we're going to move on. If you take a look at the book, Disneyland City Hall is not based, Harper Goff always said it was based on one in his hometown of Fort Collins, Colorado, and there are some similarities, but in the book, there is the Bay County Courthouse in Bay City, Michigan, and it is exactly like Disneyland City Hall. And you take a look through the checkout thing in the sleeve, and it was checked out by Harper Goff. It was checked out by Bill Martin, who was one of the designers for Main Street there and for Disneyland in 55. And so, we often think, I wonder where people get their ideas, and they can come from just about anywhere. And one of the things that for this podcast, I pulled it out, and just flipped through again to see, okay, is there anything else? And by golly, I came across an image of a house that looks very, very similar to the exterior of Walt Disney World's Haunted Mansion. Now, so the whole layout, the whole, stuff on top of the roof, the whole bit there, that's there. But of course, what happened is Claude Coates went in and he did a lot of his own redesign work, So, of course, the house now looks like there's arms that are reaching out on either side. And I'm sure since so many of you have been to Walt Disney World so many times, you've noticed that the front door is in the shape of a coffin lid. And you see that the flower pots on the front there are actually cremation urns. So what happens is they'll take an idea and then they'll plus it, they'll enhance it with all of those things. But talking about Walt Disney, getting back to Walt, I never want to forget him. His personal library at home had over 100 books, and in fact, at one time his library, this was around the time 1946, 47, they converted the library into a projection room, so Walt could screen dailies at home because he was getting into live action. But Diane said, the bookshelves still stayed, and in fact more bookshelves were added, even though the whole purpose of the room now was to show, clips from the filming that had been done that day or had been done that week. And the bookshelves were filled with David Copperfield, Vanity Fair, Ben-Hur, Oscar Wilde, Aubrey Beardsley, Candide, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, all of these. And Diane saved all of those books, and they're at the Walt Disney Family Museum in San Francisco. Some of them are on display. Some of them aren't. She said one of the things that Walt loved was they had a complete set, of course, of the Encyclopedia Britannica.
I was just going to say, on the Diane part, I love that, you mentioned her with the library at home. Did she ever share anything about Walt reading to her as a child?
Oh, yes, to her and to Sharon. And the situation, however, was that Walt had problems with his back. So sometimes, especially in the evening, it would get very painful. And so in the living room, he had this big chair. And so he would sit in the chair and he would put the open book on his lap so he could lean down a little bit and read it. But yes, he read to Diane and her sister Sharon. Diane said later in life he spent more time reading scripts and newspapers and magazines, but he still loved reading books. But when they were very, very little, he loved reading books to them, and he would, do funny voices for the characters. And I have a couple of nephews and a couple of nieces, and when they were much younger, I would read to them, and my heart was broken one time because, my gosh, I have a theatrical background, I can do accents, I can do all this, and so I'm giving these characters different voices, and my nephew looked at me and said, "Uncle Jim, can you just read the story?"
Oh no.
I was heartbroken. I let him remember that to this very day, but yes, Walt would sit there and read to them, and the thing was that he was so excited about reading, and he had books about American history. He was very interested in history. He had biographies. He loved collecting books on Abraham Lincoln, including the Carl Sandburg massive, volumes of the prairie years and the war years. And interestingly enough, Roy E. Disney also loved biographies, also loved history, but he collected books on Thomas Jefferson. And I've often wondered if there's an article or an essay there about Walt would read about Abraham Lincoln, Roy would read about Thomas Jefferson. How did that influence their leadership styles? Because it must have, in some ways. And one of the things that Emily brought up in an email is that Walt liked reading Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, and Samuel Clemens grew up only about 60 miles away from where Walt grew up, and so that was, I think, where part of the connection came from, is that things that Twain was writing about were things that Walt was very familiar about, and Walt loved hearing stories from the older people in Marceline, and so he was aware of some of the things that popped up in Twain stories that might not still have existed when he was there, and Walt remembered that his mother, Flora, used to read to the Disney children. They read them to sleep by candlelight, and he mentioned a couple of the books that she read. Uncle Remus was one of them there. Walt's father, Elias, who is really religious, saw no benefit in reading whatsoever. And he told Walt and his other sons that if they had to read, they should probably just stick to the Bible, and not do any of that other stuff. But even though Walt grew up in a small Midwest town, and we're talking about early 1900s, so there's a limit to what books are out there and what books are available, for you to get. I had this discussion recently. I have a guy who does my taxes for me, and he goes, "You're buying an awful lot of books. Can't you just go to the library and get them?"
Can't you write them off of your taxes for research?
Some of them I can. Some of them I can if I can show that they're directly related to books that I'm writing or articles that I'm writing, so that they can. Some of it can be written off as research. And so I had to point out to him, and I actually had to write out and explain that some of these books are so specialized that most libraries now just don't carry them, you know. And so we'll go with that. But where Walt's real exposure to reading came from Benton Elementary School. And his first period each day was English. So he'd read the stories of Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott, and A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, and Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. And Walt told Bob Thomas that he liked some of the Shakespeare stories, but only the parts where they fought battles and duels type thing. And he wasn't actually reading the entire book. He was reading selections, because in those days, in schools, because again, you're dealing with more or less one-room schoolhouses still type of thing, you had a selection of 6 books which were called McGuffey's Eclectic Readers. So that's another thing you're going to want to write down there. And basically, McGuffey, what he did, along with his brother, is he created this series feeling that kids should be introduced to, the great stories and poems and essays and speeches, and each volume got progressively more difficult depending upon, which grade level you went into. So you were exposed to John Milton and Edgar Allan Poe and Louisa May Alcott and all of this. Now, the very first volume taught readers that you read by sounding out the words. Now, that was a technique that was once used to teach people how to read, and some people still learn how to read that way. But as a result of that, Walt, later in life, when he was reading something, and you can see this is on film, where if he's reading somebody else's cue card or whatever, his lips are moving. And Diane Disney never realized until I pointed that out to her. She said, yes, he did lip read, and I find myself doing that sometimes, and didn't realize that came from the McGuffey readers. And so in Walt's home library, even up until the time he passed away, he had a copy of the treasury of the McGuffey readers. So that was excerpts from some of these things. And of course, the McGuffey readers are using these selections to help teach definitions of words, punctuation, things like that. Henry Ford grew up with the same thing. He said it was one of his most important childhood influences. So the McGuffey readers give us a little insight into what was Walt's literary foundation, because remember, he really only spent part of 1 year in high school. He didn't graduate high school. He didn't really even finish out that first year. So how can this man who is so literate, who is so, it comes from his natural curiosity of I've got to read. I've got to read everything and anything, and some of that came from his early childhood experiences, reading these little selections, and in some ways that seems to me to make sense, that if you give a child the most exciting chapter of something, they'll be maybe interested to read the entire book.
That's so true. I'm sorry. I'm just reminiscing because while McGuffey readers are not a thing today, we still have textbooks like that in elementary schools. They're a lot larger, but again, it's those excerpts. And I distinctly remember in fourth grade, in our fourth grade quote, I remember it said literature on the front. I don't remember the exact title. It was a green textbook, said literature, and we read a chapter from Little House in the Big Woods about the bear who sneaks into their barn, and Ma Ingalls thinks it's one of their cows. And we just loved it so much, and we ended up as a class reading the entire Little House in the Big Woods together at the end of the school day every day, because we just really loved that small excerpt that we read. And that Christmas, I got the box set of Little House and the Prairie from Laura Ingalls. And that's the books that got me reading, was because, like you said for Walt, reading that one excerpt in my elementary school classroom.
Very cool. And by the way, McGuffey readers are still used by some people for homeschooling today.
Yes.
But like you, I grew up. I remember as a kid having a 3-volume set, and again they got progressively harder as they went on, but it had myths and legends and fairy tales and all of that. And I still have those 3 volumes today because again, they were just so, oh my gosh, these are things I never would have thought of before. These are, this works through all of that, but you've got to also be careful. When I was a school teacher, sometimes I would bring in some of the black and white films that I loved, when I was younger, like Mighty Joe Young, and within the first 5 minutes, the class was entirely bored because there was so much exposition. Well, where's the big gorilla? Well, he comes later, but this sets this up so that. And you mentioned 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. When I was a junior high school teacher, one of the books we read, I was an English teacher, one of the books we read as a class was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And the first half of the book, the entire class is checked out, because when you read the book, you see the first half of the book, they're not fighting squids, they're not, all this wonderful stuff. Vern is talking about the types of knots on a ship, on this type of and I'm thinking, this is the most boring thing in the entire world. I'm glad Walt skipped to the good stuff, and it had to be explained to me that at that time something like science fiction was considered incomprehensible, and so Vern had to spend the first half of his book creating a sense of reality, talking about naval things that people had seen, people knew about, whatever. And so he had to create a sense of reality so that when he stepped into unreality, you still kept the readers as it went. But for a modern audience, they're going, I don't like that.
Jim, I'd love to know, do you have a favorite Disney adaptation of a literary classic?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, it's probably hard to choose.
It's hard to choose. 20,000 Leagues has always been one of my favorites because it was one of the very first Disney films I saw when I was a kid. I was taken to a mom and dad drove me to a drive-in, and we got to watch that, and on that big, huge screen, looking through the window of the car at that, it was just like, what is this? What is this? And the only drive-in experience that topped that, and that was a re-release of, and I can't remember which year that was now, but it was a re-release of 20,000 Leagues. But ever since then, it was like, this really works. He's captured the essence of Vern's work. He's not slavishly, just repeating what's in there. He's gone in and grabbed the heart of it and, transformed that for us. The only other drive-in experience that ever topped that was, again, I was taken, and this was the Pickwick drive-in, which no longer exists, gosh darn it, out there in Glendale, the Glendale-Burbank area, but was also taken to see a re-release of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now, what made this so memorable? And again, I'm a kid, I'm not a lot of life experience, not a lot of what's going on. And at the end of the film, when the dwarves are starting to chase the witch, it started to rain. So I'm I'm looking through the windshield, and there's rain coming down, and I'm seeing the dwarves chasing this witch up the up the mountainside, and there's rain and there's lightning, and I thought, this is the greatest thing in the entire world.
Yeah, that's a 4D film right there. Really good special effects.
It was, but to get back to your original question, I think Walt did a wonderful job with the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I think he wanted to capture the essence of things, because we remember him calling the Sherman Brothers into his office and saying, "Have you read the Jungle Book?" And they said no, and he said, "Good, don't."
Oh no!
Just highlight. There's a couple of chapters here. Highlight a couple of chapters where you like the title, and we'll go explore that. And as a result, you go, wow, yeah, okay, this works. Peter Pan, one of my favorite films, one of my favorite plays of all time, is Peter Pan. I always wanted to grow up to be Captain Hook, because I always felt that Peter Pan was just a juvenile delinquent. But in the Disney adaptation of Peter Pan, all sorts of changes had to happen. For instance, you can't turn to an audience and have the movie say, "Clap your hands if you want Tinkerbell to live." It won't work. And every other version of Peter Pan, Captain Hook's hook is on his right hand. And the reason for that is that was his sword hand. And he was poking Peter with his sword, which is why Peter cut it off. He wasn't just doing it to be mean or mischievous or whatever. He was being poked by the sword, and the only way to stop that is you cut off that hand. But in the Disney version, and it's the only version of Captain Hook like this, the hook is on the left hand. Because animators like Frank Thomas found that the right hand is more expressive. And so in order to do that in animation, you just got rid of the left hand. And most people don't even pay attention. Most people don't even notice that. And so the changes that Walt made in his adaptations, I think, was to help emphasize the story, clarify the story. So again, you asked me for the time, and I built you a clock, but that's okay.
No, it's all great information.
That idea about the left hand for Captain Hook, I always hear that question in Disney trivia. Mm-hmm. They like to ask that one because you're not paying attention. You're just so wrapped up in the story that you have to oh yeah, what hand is Captain Hook's hook on?
Same for Cinderella's shoe.
Oh,
never
what shoe
remember.
does she lose?
Don't ask me. I can't remember. I want to say left. Which one does she lose is the question.
I don't know. Oh, maybe it is left because I think at the end they put on the right, yes, but she kept the right.
Which it might have been her left, right? Because at the end, when she brings out the glass slipper,
I think it's the leg closest
to
the screen. Right. I think it's the leg closest to the screen that we see her put up to try on the other shoe, and that would be her right leg.
Right. And so that is the glass slipper that she has. So the one she lost must have been her left shoe. She left her left shoe behind. All right.
That's the way to remember it. There we go. A little mnemonic. Now I will not get that wrong on Disney trivia.
So, Jim,
That's why it's so much fun to talk with you ladies, and thank you so much for, interjecting all of your insights as well, because it just influences me. It inspires me. One of the book series, and Walt, loved reading, nature, things like that. A lot of the serious nonfiction stuff, but he also read a lot of fiction stuff. One of the book series that he really loved was written by an author by the name of Horatio Algier, and in fact, Horatio Algier's name just became associated. He wrote a lot of different stories, but they were all the exact same story. It's a impoverished young boy who rises to success due to hard work and determination and courage and honesty, and I think Walt saw a lot of himself in that if you put your mind to it, it doesn't make any difference where you came from. It's where you're going to end up. He also read the Tom Swift series, the original Tom Swift series, because by the time I was growing up, there was Tom Swift Jr. Book series. But basically, Tom Swift is this boy who uses science, and inventions and technology and problem solving, to save the day. And speaking of which, I was really surprised about this, and then once I found this information and started to explore it, it was just like a whole new thing opened up. People had never been asked about this before, and there it was. Walt liked to read a series of books about a character called Jimmy Dale, the Gray Seal, by Frank Packard. Now, Jimmy Dale was a pulp character, and his adventures appeared in installments in magazines like Detective Fiction magazine and Short Story magazine. That's how it was once upon a time. Even Sherlock Holmes was. Arthur Conan Doyle didn't write a book. What he wrote was he wrote a series of episodes for a magazine, and he'd get the money from that, and then he'd compile the separate episodes into a book. And Packard did the same, and so there's like about 6 Jimmy Dale books out there, and I thought, I've never heard of this character before, in my life. And then I start researching, and Walter Gibson, who's the man who created the character of the Shadow knows, said that his main inspiration was these Jimmy Dale books, because Jimmy Dale was this amateur private eye. He was a safe cracker. His secret identity was the Gray Seal, who was, this two-fisted guy who could, all of this. And what he would do is he would sometimes open the most tightly guarded safes in the world, and he would leave his calling card, which was a gray diamond paper seal. That's why it was called the Gray Seal. And he had disguises and alter egos, and he had his own private sanctorum, and all of this. And and I'm looking, and this is why you got to go back and reread things. You got to go and relook things. While I was doing research on this, I ran across a publicity photo of Walt at his desk at the Hyperion studio, and stacked on the desk are some books, And I thought, oh well, that's interesting. Let me try and blow this up. Let's try and get a magnifying glass. Let's try. And one of the books, Jimmy Dale and the Blue Envelope Murder. And I thought, holy cow, Walt had that on his desk. He was probably reading that. And I got a chance to talk with Ron Miller when I was a speaker up at the Walt Disney Family Museum. And I brought it up, and I said, do you know anything about Jimmy Dale? Did Walt talk about that? Diane had no clue. Ron goes, oh, yeah. He says in 1952, Walt bought the rights to the entire series. He was going to make a detective TV series out of this. This might have been the very first Disney superhero type character, a mystery man type character. And he says, oh, yeah, sometimes you'd go into Walt's office and he would act out the stories. He would be Jimmy Dale. You know, he loved the idea of disguises and secrets and things like this. And I've talked to a couple of other people from the who worked there at Disney in the 60s. And oh, yeah. He says Walt pitched it to both ABC and NBC, and ABC turned it down, saying, well, that's not Disney. People won't watch that. That's not Disney. NBC said, well, we might consider it if you make a pilot film, which is how a lot of TV series in those days were sold. You know, a pilot film was made, or the character would appear on another series, you know, for a half hour or an hour, so that like Honey West appeared on the Gene Barry detective series, and so people could see what does this look like? We can't see what this looks like. And they said, well, if you make a pilot, maybe we'll consider that. And Walt says, we don't make free samples.
Oh.
And so that was the end of that. But again, when we talk about alternate Disney reality, Walt could have produced, you know, this huge mystery man detective series, and so some of that impetus actually ended up in some of those multi-part series that we saw on the Disney Weekly TV show. You know, 2 or 3 part things, movies that, gosh, I wish Disney would release, put on Disney Plus, do something. You know, I remember growing up, I loved watching. There was a series called Gallagher about a newsboy in around the turn of the century, and I guess I associated with Gallagher. You know, I would never have been that plucky. I would never have been that athletic. But oh yeah, this is good. You know, I love this time period and all of that. You know, when we talk about books that influence Walt, you know, one of the most important, of course, is The Heart of Our Cities, The Urban Crisis and Cure by Victor Gruen. Okay? Towards the end of his life, Walt, of course, was looking, you know, to read books about community planning, about schools because of Cal Arts and all of that. He read a lot of books like Garden Cities of Tomorrow by Ebenezer Howard, which a lot of people forget was another biggie there. But this was one of those books that he carried around with him all the time. And when they went on that last family cruise through British Columbia in the summer of 1966, where the whole family was together, this was the book that Walt was reading. And when I interviewed Marty Sklar, he said, oh, yeah, that book was always on Walt's desk. That's what, you know, he was referring to. Now the author was designed some of the very first malls and pedestrian malls, you know, in the late 1950s and 60s. And the book is about the fact that a lot of people are leaving the city. They're going into the suburbs. And so the city is dying. The city is not really functioning, you know, for the populace there. And so his contention was you create a new center, and then you spoke out from that center to the suburbs, so the suburbs still have their own autonomy, but they're connected to the main city where they can socialize, they can experience culture together. And I sent both of you ladies the cover of the 1964 edition that Walt was reading, and you see on the cover there's this huge green circle, and in the center is the city, and there's spokes that go out to these other suburban areas and connect. And you take a look at that and you go, gosh, that sounds pretty similar to Walt's idea for, Epcot.
I was going to say, is this our experimental prototype community of tomorrow?
Sure sounds like it.
And again, Walt isn't copying, but just like adaptations for films and whatever, he's grabbing hold of those ideas and then just sending them through his magnificent mind, and they're coming out this way. But again, you have to be very careful when you say, oh, well, this influenced Walt, because I grew up watching the weekly Disney television show, and I just loved that massive library behind Walt, and there just seemed to be every book in the entire world, in that. And when Walt passed away, one of the jobs that Disney archivist Dave Smith had was he had to catalog everything in the office. And in those bookshelves, over 600 books just on those bookshelves.
I would love that in my office. Right now I've only got 8 bookshelves that can hold maybe 100 books. I would love to get to Walt's level.
Well, you're going to it at the rate you're going in terms of reading books that way. And Dave's list was like 24 pages long, single spaced. And
have you seen this list? The full list?
Oh gosh, yeah. Dave gave me a copy of it.
Oh wow!
Maybe,
so what title surprised you the most?
Well, and I was going to say maybe. Since Courtney and Emily have been such strong promoters of books, maybe I'll be able to dig out my copy and go to Kinko's, and you guys can have a copy there. But
yeah, we'd love to share that.
Before you say yes, you need to realize what Dave told me, and he said, look, Walt really didn't know what most of those books were there. He said what would happen is people would constantly send him books, either autographed copies of books that they had written, or books that, they wanted Walt to consider for some future film project or whatever. So Walt, being as smart as he was, had the secretaries just put them on the bookshelf. So if these people ever showed up,
they were there.
Their book was up there, and you were asking, did I find any surprises? It was constant surprise, because it was just, we talk about eclectic, we talk about no rhyme or reason. There's a copy of The Adventures of Tintin, Destination Moon, but it's in French, and there's no other copies of the series, and there's no English translations. There's a souvenir program from the Seattle World's Fair of 1962, but nothing from either the 1939 or 64 New York World's Fair. Walter Knott, who founded Knott's Berry Farm in Buena Park there, he was highly conservative, and so he autographed a copy of Conscience of a Conservative, which was a 1960 book about Barry Goldwater, because at that point Walt was a staunch Goldwater supporter, and there are other Republican-themed books on the shelves, because later in life Walt tended to become more and more a conservative Republican. But then again, there are books like A Tribute to John F. Kennedy by Pierre Salinger, so it's not like, oh yes, there's a theme going on here. Ruth Plumley Thompson, who continued the Oz series, autographed a 1934 copy of one of her books, because she was constantly pitching Walt that he should produce her version of Oz, and there's another Oz book, Who's Who in Oz by Jack Snow. Pamela Travers, of course, who created Mary Poppins, autographed a copy of Mary Poppins in the Park, the 1958 edition, as well as Mary Poppins A to Z. And in the book, she wrote to Walt Disney, hoping that your association with Mary Poppins will bring you joy and satisfaction and be, as she herself has so often put it, a pleasure and a treat. With greetings from P.L. Travers, June 1961. And of course, we know that Walt got interested in Mary Poppins because his wife Lillian would read at night to Sharon and Diane from Mary Poppins. And he'd hear the girls just giggling and having so much fun that he one night went in and picked up the copy off of Diane's nightstand, you know?
Yeah, when we were talking about Diane, I was thinking of Mary Poppins specifically, because I've definitely heard Walt share that story or read it in a text about Mary Poppins.
Mm-hmm. So you know, you just never know these things. And I know we're coming close to the end here, but so I want to mention, before we do anything else, the book that Walt himself said was the most influential in his entire life. And,
yes, please.
And the thing,
I was sorry. I was just interjecting. Yes, please share that. I'll edit it out. Go from the top. Sorry.
No, don't edit it out. That's part of the joy of podcasts is the spontaneity, you know. And it's like, this is a real conversation, and those of you who are listening at home or while you were walking or exercising or whatever, you're part of that conversation. Courtney and Emily just haven't figured out a way for you to contribute in real time to the conversation here. So this is a direct quote from Walt. Everyone has been remarkably influenced by a book or books. In my case, it was a book on cartoon animation. I discovered it in the Kansas City Library. At the time, I was preparing to make motion picture animation my life's work. The book told me all I needed to know as a beginner, all about the arts and the mechanics of making drawings that move on the theater screen. From the basic information, I could go on to develop my own way of movie telling. Finding that book was one of the most important and useful events in my life. It happened at just the right time. The right time for reading a story or an article or a book is important. By trying too hard to read a book that for our age and understanding is beyond us, we may tire of it. Then even after, we'll avoid it and deny ourselves the delights it holds. So the book that he picked out from the Kansas City Library several times, apparently, was called Animated Cartoons, How They Are Made, Their Origin and Development by E.G. Lutz, L-U-T-Z. It originally came out in 1920. It was so popular that it was reprinted 6 times within the first 5 years of its release. And in fact, it's public domain, so it's still reprinted today. So you can find yourself, you know, a very nice reprint copy. One of the ones I recommend is the Applewood Books copy, because not only did they reprint the book, they reprinted the dust jacket and everything, you know, and you can get it for under $20, you know. Now, the importance of this book, and when he brought in people like Hugh Harman and Rudy Ising and all that and told them he was going to teach them animation, he told them to go check out the book, you know, and so there was an entire generation. The importance of this book is there was no other book on animation at that time ever. There were maybe a half dozen articles that had appeared in film magazines. So here was a book, and Lutz is literally recounting how the work is done at an animation studio. And so it's been lost to time what animation studio he may have worked at, but what he is listing was standard at most animation studios, and nobody knew how to do all of this stuff. Now, one of the reasons Walt liked this book is that Lutz also gave suggestions how to streamline the tedious animation process, drawing after drawing after drawing after drawing after drawing. And he came up with, one of the ideas he came up with was a cell. But you don't draw the characters on the cell. You draw the background on the cell. You draw the characters on the paper, and then you put the cell over the paper and photograph it. So you don't have to keep redrawing the background over and over and over. You just keep drawing the characters over and over and over. And Lutz came up with walk cycles. A walk cycle is, how is the character going to walk in one direction? A leg picks up, how does the foot hit the ground, what happens with the other leg when it does that? And Lutz's contention was that if you draw those 10 drawings of a person, standing and then walking and then coming to standing again, you can keep repeating those drawings. So the character can keep on walking. And to save even more time, you can flip those drawings over so the character is walking back the other way. Huge save of time. Lutz did have some innovative comments. He talks about how animation could be used as a valuable teaching tool. He talks about Alice in Wonderland being a good example of a fanciful tale that could be done for children or all audiences. And so you take a look at that and you wonder, I wonder if that's one of the reasons we got the Alice comedies, is all of this, emphasis on, Alice in Wonderland and the possibilities of the characters and the possibilities of doing things that can't be done in live action. So again, I actually have a couple of copies of the book, and there's actually a website devoted to Lutz, and you always discover new things, right? And the grandson or the great grandson or whatever, they pulled their copy, the original edition, off the bookshelf, to look through it, and in there they found a typewritten note from Lutz talking about his visit to Winsor McCay in 1919 when Winsor McCay is doing Gertie the Dinosaur.
Very cool. Well, as always, when we chat, our list just grows from talking to you.
I know. I'm the most expensive guest you ever had on because I tell people, oh, look at these books, look. And I get so excited about them. People go, oh, maybe I should have that book.
Absolutely.
Just remember, you can't have everything.
I know.
And just remember, you have to make some difficult decisions. If I buy this book, then I'm not going to have the money to buy that book.
Unless you can get a tax write-off, right?
Well, unfortunately, most of my books can't be written off. But and so that's why I go to this tax guy. Is he's out there in Los Angeles, and I hooked up with him because when I was performing, I could write off costumes. I could write off transportation to performances. You could write off. Every little bit helps. I am not a rich man. I have never been a rich man, and I wish I could write off all of the books, but I can write off some of my books. So ask your tax guy. If you can do that. I of course can prove that, hey, I'm writing books, and before the end of the year, I've got the Vault of Walt Volume 9, the Halloween edition, that's coming out the end of September here. I've got the Hidden Treasures of the Disney Cruise Line, about the history and the storytelling on each of the ships. You know, and the last time we were on the ship was, January, right?
Yeah.
And I
this
found,
year, it's crazy. It doesn't feel like it.
I know, right? It seems like 20 years ago. And then by the end of the year, Secret Stories of Extinct Walt Disney World. So, you know, you can always check Amazon, but you can always check www.themeparkpress.com, you know, to check and see if that book is there, you know.
Or you can always have the Courtney Emily method, which is put all the books you want on your Christmas list and hope other people buy them for you.
It's sort of like a wedding registry, right?
Pretty much.
Every Christmas, about half of my Christmas list to my parents when they ask, oh, what do you want for Christmas? I'm like, here's my book list.
Then Emily and I compare, which book did you get? Which book did I get? What are we going to do on the show next year? So that always helps. So we're definitely looking forward to your upcoming works for sure. Maybe we'll have you back for that super secret one to talk about once that's out.
Yes. Actually, it's very exciting because, again, that's what happens too, is once you get into it, suddenly you're finding all these other bits and pieces. And it's like, these bits and pieces were always there. How come nobody ever saw them before? How come I didn't, you know, pay attention to that? And you should all take into account Emily's suggestion to reread, because one of the books that I reread every couple of years is the Bob Thomas Walt Disney and American Original. And one of the reasons I do that is not just because it's a well-written book and it moves along very smoothly, and you would think, well, you've read it so many times, you already know what's going to happen. What happens is, because the more I learn about Walt, the more I learn about the films, the more I learn about animation, now when I'm reading that one sentence, you know, that I just skimmed over maybe the first time I read it, it stands out like a neon flash. And you go, oh, holy cow, how has that always been there? Did Amazon elves sneak into my house at night and write in other things in the book? One of the things I just learned this week is you can verify whether a book came from Thomas Jefferson's library. And what happened is, in the 1700s, is he sold his entire library to the Library of Congress.
Library of Congress, yes.
But then he thought his house seemed empty without books, so he bought more books. And that one got sold off, 1820, 1830, something like that.
Thomas Jefferson had a lot of debt, so maybe that's why Roy connected with Jefferson.
Roy
was always getting Walt out of debt. Well, Roy was the money guy.
Maybe that's why I'm connected with Thomas Jefferson, is because I'm buying too many gosh darn books. But what would happen is, if you went through the Jefferson book, to tell that it came from Jefferson's personal library, is on a page where the page was numbered I, he would print in ink the letter T in front of the I. So if you're not paying attention, you would just miss that. But it's one of the ways that booksellers, you know, you go through to try and verify, you know, what printing is this, you know, was this, you know, how can you do that? And again, I just learned that this week, so I guess you can teach old dogs new tricks.
I love it. Well, if you don't mind, we're going to give our listeners a preview of what's up for us next, and then we'll close out with the quote you've found for us. Our October selection takes a semi-spooky turn with the fiction series of Twisted Tales. We'll read Part of Your World by Liz Braswell to get a perspective on the what-if scenario and retelling of The Little Mermaid. The series has several volumes of villain-themed adventures, which are popular among Disney fans. This will be the first Twisted Tale both of us have ever read, and we're excited to be joined by a guest reader and Twisted Tale veteran, Victoria Wade, also known as He Calls Me Pineapple Princess on social media. She's a fellow Marylander, host of the Disney Tea with V podcast, and a social media powerhouse who uses her platform to share her Disney-style travel and overall magical vibes. We hope you'll join us in Victoria in October. And be sure to check us out on the most recent episode of Notably Disney, episode 51, where we joined the host Brett to discuss our love of Disney sing-along songs. If you'd like to keep up with us in the meantime, you can always find us on Twitter and Instagram at Book of the Mouse, or email us with comments and ideas to bookofthemouseclub@gmail.com. Be sure to leave us a review on iTunes so others can find our podcast and read and listen along with us. If you want to follow me, Courtney, I am at Great Gatsby, which should be no surprise given our Great Gatsby conversation earlier, and on Twitter at Courtney_Guth.
And you can keep up with me, Emily, on Instagram and Twitter at Emily_McD. And Jim, before you give us your closing quote, can you please remind our listeners how they can keep up with you and your projects and the best places to buy your books?
Okay. Again, Amazon.com, themeparkpress.com will keep you up to date on what the books are. If you want to contact me or read about all things Disney, go to www.mouseplanet.com. Last week I wrote about the Monsanto Adventure Through Inner Space ride at Disneyland using the training manual that was given to cast members. This week, tomorrow, it'll be the Scarecrow of Romney Marsh. Next week, it's a jungle out there on Pandora, about Pandora's jungle. And coming up towards the end of the month will be the entire history of the Perils of Mickey, which was a marketing campaign in 1993 to celebrate Mickey's 65th birthday, where they were trying to make, they went back to the Mickey of the 1930s. They tried to make him, very adventurous, fighting pirates and alligators and things like this, and the whole thing just died. So mouseplanet.com, and as you listen there, Courtney and Emily, pretty impressive women. Don't mess around there.
Oh, thank you.
And I have a quote, but because Courtney again keeps mentioning Diane this podcast, I pulled a second quote. The first quote was from 1958 on Disney's TV show, where he says, "I hope you will get the same inspiration from this book as when I first read it." And so I hope if you get any of those books that we talked about today, you will get the same inspiration from that. But here's a book quote just for Courtney, although Emily can listen in because Emily is great.
Thanks, Jim.
This is from the Pete Martin interview, and so Walt is talking to Pete, and he goes, "My daughter Diane was quite a reader. When I was making Bambi, she was about 10, I guess. She had read the book. When I finished the picture and brought it home and ran it, she cried and cried when Bambi's mother was killed. She said to me, 'Daddy, why did you have to kill Bambi's mother?' And I said, 'Well, it was in the book, dear.' She said, 'There were plenty of things in the book that you changed. Why couldn't you have changed that?' And she had me there."
Oh, I love that little moment between father and daughter. Thank you so much for sharing both of those quotes. And as always, thank you for joining us to share your wealth of knowledge with not only us, but our listeners as well.
Thank you so much. And if you get any response, let me know. And maybe you'll even invite me back on in another year or so.
Absolutely. I told you, you're coming back for your super secret book. We've teased it enough for them. The people want to know what it is.
Right, and you're the only one who knows. Even my publisher doesn't know.
Maybe we can tell Emily after.
Yes.
I'll stop recording now and we'll let her know. Book of the Mouse Club has no affiliation with the Walt Disney Company. The views and opinions expressed by hosts and participants are theirs and theirs alone. They do not represent the organizations or companies they happen to work for.